The Triumphant Light is hot off the presses, and I thought I'd try something a little bit different this season. This is an early slash week one EX Pokemon tier list that's a little bit based off of our first weekend of results and a little bit of speculation on my part of what I think will be good moving forward. And then we'll refresh this in a couple of weeks once we have some more data to look at and see how right or wrong I got it. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below of where you think I hit and where you think I absolutely missed. Let's go ahead and jump into it, shall we? Starting off in the D tier today, we're not going to spend a lot of time on these cards. They are just not really up to snuff. There's no competitive results for them, and I don't expect them to improve as the metagame evolves. Our D tier EX Pokemon right now, in my opinion, are Gengar, Marowak, Cresselia, and Lapras. Our C tier Pokemon in today's roundups are ones that'll still be spiking a tournament on occasion, but you also won't bat an eye if they don't show up among any of the top results. They likely have a decent matchup into one or more of the top decks, but are going to really struggle into some of the other things that are popular. Let's go ahead and break them down, shall we? Our first C tier grouping is 3 water Pokemon, Glaceon EX, Gyarados EX, and Blastoise EX. All 3 of these pair quite well with Misty flipping heads or Manaphy charging up powerful finishers on your bench, but at the same time, I think they have various shortcomings that tend to make them worse pairings for those other powerful cards compared to water Pokemon that we're going to cover in the A, B, and S tiers above these. Next up in the C tier, we have Pidgeot EX, Licky Licky EX, Wigglytuff EX, and Probopass EX. All 4 of these Pokemon share one thing in common. They love having energy put on them ahead of time by Dialga. That being said, none of these are remotely Dialga's best pairings, and other options in the S, A, and B categories above them outclass them in either terms of consistency or power with things you can put metal energy on ahead of curve. Our next group of C-listers are all Lightning Pokemon, Pachirisu EX, Pikachu EX, and Zapdos EX. Pachirisu EX might actually be the most powerful thing in the C tier grouping overall, with the 18 trainer variation occasionally spiking deep runs inside of tournaments, but it's worth noting in almost every single tournament that Pachirisu 18 trainer has put up a good result, there are a dozen others or more that fall completely flat on their face. That deck list is definitely very gimmicky and gets hard countered by a handful of things in the metagame that are consistent and powerful. I also expect it gets markedly worse with the Dialga Arceus deck becoming popular that we saw during the first weekend. Pikachu EX and Zapdos EX don't really need any introduction. You can play the Pikachu EX deck from Season 1, but in a post-Cyrus world, it's really hard to maneuver around with that deck like you used to before that card existed. We round out our C-tier EX Pokemon with something of a hodgepodge: Weavile, Venusaur, Miscellaneous, Mewtwo, and Arcanine. Weavile's only real place in the metagame was as a Darkrai pairing, but there are simply other partners for Darkrai that have proven more consistent and powerful, such as Magnezone, meaning Weavile's best home, generally speaking, doesn't want it. Venusaur was really close to having a moment in the sun, as it's really stellar into all the various Darkrai variations, since your sustain allows you to survive the smaller chip shots quite well. However, in the previous metagame, Charizard came up as deck number 2 and quickly put the plant monster down. Perhaps in our current metagame, with Charizard struggling a little bit, Venusaur has a chance to move up from its C tier home in the future. Mismagius was a pet card of mine in the previous format, but I really struggled to find a good EX partner to pair it with. I'm not really certain what metagame shift could cause it to become more consistent and powerful, but I don't think what we're currently seeing is it. Mewtwo struggles like Pikachu EX did from the first season. Cyrus really just did a number on it, and that card doesn't appear to be going anywhere in our metagame. Finally, Arcanine EX is a victim of the fact that the breakpoints in our metagame have shifted upwards to higher HP with the addition of Giant Cape to the format. The times when Arcanine was really good, there were a lot of 120 and 130 HP things that you could clear with Giovanni, and with the relevant breakpoint being 140 or even 160 now, Arcanine is just not what it used to be. Our B tier Pokemon today are ones that are largely the focal point of decks that are seeing a good amount of play in our first round of tournaments, but the results so far leave a bit to be desired. I wouldn't be surprised if another of them slip downward as this metagame develops more. Let's kick off the B tier with the grass trio that were really dominant last metagame: Executor EX, Yanmega EX, and Celebi EX. The big thing that shifted to push these cards from S all the way down to B is that the Dialga Arceus deck that was the breakout deck this first weekend absolutely crushes this matchup. Dialga in the previous metagame was something of a coin flip into them, but they've traded out their stage 1 Yanmega for Arceus, and they are just more consistent and hit harder than before. Speaking of that trade out, Yanmega is down here because one of its other previous best homes, the Dialga Yanmega deck, now no longer really wants to play it. Celebi is still probably the best grass finisher in the metagame, and it's seeing play inside of successful decks alongside Leafeon, but I expect that's just a facet of that. There isn't a better grass finisher, and if we ever get one, it will likely quickly be thrown by the wayside. Next up in the B tier, we have Charizard and Moltres EXs. These two are played together, so they move up and down the tier list with one another. The Executor deck being pushed down and likely continuing to lose meta share means that Charizard and Moltres are getting worse off, as that was the biggest matchup that they were preying upon while struggling against other things like Darkrai Magnezone, while also not having a stellar matchup into the Dialga Arceus deck that's taken the stage by storm. While Leafeon has introduced a new grass deck to the metagame, the early matchup stats we have show that that matchup is much closer for Charizard, since Leafeon puts out so much damage so consistently, sometimes running down Moltres before it can get fully set up. Next up, we have a pair of water friends in the B tier, Palkia and Starmie EX. These are two of the better pairings by the numbers from our first weekend for Misty and Manaphy. However, it's worth noting their performance pales in comparison to Articuno EX, which absolutely dominated in the 18 trainer shell. The 18 trainer Palkia deck in particular saw a little bit of play as well with the addition of Irida, but its performance overall was much worse than Articuno, I assume because once you do your big blast, you have to go back to dealing 30 damage for a few turns while you charge back up again. Finally, we round out the B tier with Aerodactyl and Mew EXs. Aerodactyl sees some amount of play as a top end in the fighting box shells, with part of the appeal of this one being that you're guaranteed to never lead on that fossil, so the Pokemon you want to finish the game with is never going to be your starter, which adds a little bit of consistency to your openings. Mew is a pretty good utility card, but how good ebbs and flows with the metagame. Charizard and Palkia, two cards that Mew is a quality counter to, being down in the B tier means that Mew's utility and viability in the metagame is down a bit as well. Moving on to the A tier, we have Pokemon that have large metagame representations in our early tournaments, or ones that I personally think are especially well positioned for attacking the popular decks that we've seen so far. First up in the A tier, we have Leafeon and Darkrai EXs. Leafeon is definitely the new grass kid on the block. It kind of serves as an Executor / superior split card in these aggressive decks. You have this frontline Pokemon that effectively attacks for 70 for just 2 energy since it charges itself, and then while it sits up front, cracking your opponent for a consistent amount of damage every single turn, its Pokemon ability gets to charge up Celebi at double speed, so when they finally clear out your grass pup, Celebi is an absolute monster ready to one-hit KO most things that you can follow up with. Darkrai during our first weekend was relegated mostly to being a one-hit wonder, with its Magnezone control variations being the deck list that found success, and the other smattering of others, Weavile and Greninja in particular, falling mostly flat on their faces. That being said, the Darkrai Magnezone deck list definitely was not only popular, but also had solid performance metrics as well. The remainder of our A tier is probably the most subjective part of today's tier list. They are, in my opinion, Infernape EX, Gallade EX, Garchomp EX, and Machamp EX. Infernape has some incredible breakpoints into this meta game right now. It clears out Arceus, Leafeon, Darkrai, and even Dialga in one shot thanks to weakness into the metal type Pokemon. And Infernape got some excellent pairings to go with it, allowing Heatran to be a favorable lead that you can also retreat for free with an Arceus of your own, and then Dawn Energy back up to Infernape to attack 2 turns in a row. I think Arceus's Rotom is also pretty stellar with Infernape as well, because in the event that one of these 140 HP Pokemon gets to wear a cape, you can tap it with Rotom first to soften it up a little bit before Infernape gets to go ahead and Cyrus it up and clean it out for 140 before your opponent is expecting it to go down. All three of our fighting friends share one thing in common right now. They are all excellent finishers to put behind a copy of Sudowoodo, who I think is perhaps one of the best counters into our current metagame. Dialga Arceus, 18 Trainer Articuno, the Leafeon Celebi decks, all of these are looking to go EX Pokemon into EX Pokemon, meaning Sudowoodo's deal 50 for 1 is probably one of the best leads you can have right now, and it needing a minimal energy investment means you have plenty of time to put energy on any of these three to get cracking after Sudowoodo finally goes down. In terms of sporadic tournament results so far, Glade followed by Garchomp have the most results from our first weekend, but I think part of the appeal of Machamp with Sudowoodo is that Sudowoodo has the downside of being a 2 energy retreat cost, meaning you're incentivized to play Leaf, which also mitigates one of the biggest downsides Machamp has, which is its Stage 1 and Basic have a 2 energy retreat cost when you lead on them. Finally, we're at the S tier. These cards had the best performances by the numbers, converting smaller metagame shares to massive parts of the top performing deck list in our first weekend of tournaments. They are Dialga EX, Arceus EX, and Articuno EX. Dialga and Arceus are obviously played together, with Arceus EX feeling like perhaps the most powerful pairing that Dialga has had since it released. The big upside to Arceus is that it's simply a basic Pokemon, which means you only need to have just it. Other potential pairings that Dialga has had in the past have been things like Yanmega, Wiggly, and others that we listed in the lower tiers that are all stage 1s, meaning in addition to having Dialga and their basic, you need a third card as well to really start attacking with them. Arceus' EX biggest drawback in this type of scenario is the fact that it has the retreat cost of 2, but because Dialga also has a retreat cost of 2, your deck's interested in playing things like Leaf anyways, which mitigates Arceus' biggest drawback as well. Fingers crossed, Articuno EX is the most overrated card in today's roundup, but it had the strongest performance on our first weekend of events after the Dialga Arceus deck. That being said, as someone who's played card games for a decade, linear proactive decks like the 18 Trainer Articuno deck often tend to be the best while metagames are being figured out. So if there's a fighting deck or an Infernape deck that's able to put together the tools to be competitive against things like Dialga as well as Articuno, that could easily push this cheesy deck out of the format as the metagame develops. That being said, I think its first weekend of results easily earned it its place in the S tier ranking. I would love feedback in the comments down below if you think an EX ranking video like this has value this close to the card pack releasing. As I mentioned at the start, I plan to revisit this topic in a couple of weeks once we have a few weeks worth of information and tournament results to be a little bit more data driven about the placements, as this list did have a good bit of speculation in it since things are so fresh. If you think this is great, let me know. If you think it's not so great, I'd love to hear why. If you enjoyed my musings at any rate, please smash that like button. And if you enjoy daily Pokemon Pocket content, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss any of the fantastic off-meta brews and weekly data-driven deck roundups that I'm doing here 7 days a week. I appreciate you making it all the way through the end, and I hope your next pack is an excellent one.